desperation is a powerful motivator. Genesis 43 reveals to us that the famine continued in the land of Israel, that Jacob's family continues to be hungry. The food that they had previously purchased has been consumed. And they've even waited a while because of Jacob's reluctance to allow Benjamin, the youngest, to go with the older brothers. But now, as we begin this chapter, there is no other option. And so the 10 brothers set off to Egypt, or return to Egypt in order to, again, buy food. This time, of course, they bring twice the money as well as an assortment of gifts. It is clear that their guilty consciences still weigh heavily upon them. When they're brought into Joseph's house, they assume that they are going to be arrested. They seek out the steward of the house and profess to him their ignorance and their innocence in regards to the money that had been returned to them on their previous journey. Look, as I pointed out last week, they are in agony over their prior sin. This causes them, this has the effect of causing them to miss what God is doing, to miss what the real point of this whole episode is, and sin and guilt cause a sort of blindness. Notice that in verse 23, the steward offers them peace and testifies to them what the God of their father is doing. And it strikes me that had they been paying attention, they would have asked themselves how this Egyptian man knew about the God of Jacob. Not only that, but Joseph's personal questions, Joseph's mention of God's grace failed to resonate within them. It's not until the end of the chapter when they become reasonably convinced that their lives are not in danger. It's not until then that they notice that they have been seated at the table according to their birth order. Only then does their fear begin to give away and they have a sort of amazement. Now look, to be fair, from their perspective, it would seem unlikely that Joseph would still be alive, and certainly inconceivable that he would be in any position of power. Even so, the point remains the same. See, when we're brought down by our own guilt, when we're burdened by the fears of the broken world that we live in, when we're focused on just our own survival, we are prone to miss out on what is truly beautiful and good and godly. These 10 brothers were front and center in one of the most amazing and miraculous stories of redemption ever, and yet they're completely oblivious to it. They're so focused on themselves that they're just drifting from one terror to the next. They're groveling and scheming, not realizing what God is doing for them, for their good, for the blessing of their households. As always, as we read this, we see that God has a greater purpose and a greater blessing for them than they could even imagine. And it strikes me, I believe that the same is true for us. See, God's grace and forgiveness has powerful and necessary theological components. Godly guilt drives us to repentance, and repentance brings with it the joy of God's forgiveness and salvation. But that's not all. There are practical benefits as well, and not the least of which is having our eyes open to what God is doing, being able to see what God is using us for and how he's using us for his glory, for the advancement of his kingdom. And the reality is that this is infinitely better, this is infinitely more fulfilling than being solely focused on ourselves. We catch a glimpse of this in this chapter. For the brothers go from starving at the beginning to feasting in Joseph's house at the end. And that, even that, as good as it was just the beginning. So as you read this text, as you begin to see the good that God is working, take some time. Let's evaluate our own lives. Let's ask ourselves, are we in bondage? Is our focus draining our joy or drawing us towards beauty? What is God doing around us? How can we join in? So as we read this, may we all lift up our eyes and behold the glory and the wonder of who God is and what he's doing even in our midst.